Cancer is not just a biological response. In fact, what it is it's a psycho-emotional response. It's not a biological response. And the body is not in any kind of a healing phase. There are no healing phases in cancer. What's essentially happening is the body has become constricted because of our psycho-emotional pain or stress that's become suppressed. And that constriction, which I can explain much deeper, but I'm just going to kind of give a quick overview here because it's a little more complicated than this. But that restriction or suppression creates a problem in our physiology. And because there's a compromised area of our body because of that problem, that begins to cut off the life force to that area of the body. And because of that, there's less nutrition reaching a specific spot in our body, and there's less capacity for our body to heal that area. And so that area begins to actually die. So now inflammation may occur because that's what the body always does to try to heal an area. So the body will become inflamed, for example, around a tumor, but it cannot heal that spot. It cannot complete the healing because the suppression is the cause of the constriction. And because there's a constriction, the body can't do what it would normally do. So what's actually happening is a person is in a death process. That's really what's happening. They can heal, yes. Like what Danny Carroll, it sounds like he said, is that cancer, terminal cancer is a misdiagnosis, sort of, because no cancer is terminal, not necessarily. That's a false belief because we can heal ourselves. We can reverse this process, but it's not a false diagnosis using the mentality that the body's in a healing response. It's not in a healing response. It's trying to heal itself, but can't. And that's why a person will die of cancer if they don't resolve the root cause. So my work and Dr. Hammer's diverges significantly. And I think because I followed a different path and a different theory, that also led me to discovering more accuracy with regards to what's actually causing cancer. So for example, the cause of lung cancer, I will say here with 100% confidence, because I know that it's the truth because of observation and because I teach this my students. They go out into the world and they try to see, is this right, what Paul's saying? And then they discover, like, oh my God, it is actually true every time. So I would just share this right now so anyone can just, like, don't just believe me. You can just go and find this out for yourself if you have the opportunities to observe. The cause of lung cancer is unresolved grief. So the type of psycho-emotional stress that we experience affects different parts of our body too, because of how our brain and our nervous system interacts with different regions of our body. Like I was saying in the beginning, if someone's nervous, they will blush, let's say, and you'll see like a change of color on the face, but it's not a change of color on the feet, or the change of color around the belly button or something. Like blushing. So there's a specific kind of connection that goes on between our brain and our body. And our brain is where we, is the region, let's say, where we do our thinking, and the body is where we do our feeling. So we actually
So
feel in the body.
what is the connection of the lungs and grief?
Well, that's the connection. So if we experience grieving pain, it will
Mm-hmm.
constrict our lungs. It will affect the physiology around our lungs and in our lungs. And if we suppress grief because we don't have the tools or the knowledge or the awareness of how to deal with that tremendous pain, because if someone dies that you love, it's like one of the hardest things to have to deal with psycho-emotionally, and most people don't know how to deal with it. This leads to more and more reasons why the root cause of cancer needs to be really taken seriously and understood. Because the reason, for example, that we generally, the average person doesn't know how to actually deal with grief is because it's not even taught. It's not part of mainstream. Like when you go to school, we don't learn about grief. Like you can do 15, 20 years of school and walk out into the world having no idea and preparation on how to deal with the death of a loved one. So when that
Mm-hmm.
happens, because we're a human being, we will be impacted massively psycho-emotionally and just not know what to even do with it. And that's what leads often to the suppression of the pain.
What about the exposure to carcinogens, like through smoking or asbestos or toxic mold? Wouldn't
Wonderful
that
question.
lead to lung cancer? And I think we have scientific data to support it does.
There's a strong correlation, so I'll explain why that is. There's definitely correlations, but it's not the cause. And before I answer that question, I just want to finish about the lung cancer because I was explaining how there's a difference in my discoveries versus Hammer. So, what I hear very common in the German new medicine community is that they've been taught to believe that lung cancer is caused by the fear of dying. So, a person's afraid to die. It's never the cause. I've never seen that. In 15 years of working with cancer patients, it's never the cause. In fact, many people want to die. It's the opposite. So it's close. Like Dr. Hammer got close with some of these things because there is an element of death there, right? A person's afraid to die in their theory. But that's not what's causing lung cancer. It's a death that has actually already occurred and they're in pain about the death and it's not resolved, and that's actually the cause of lung cancer. So this is what I've just when I started to research German new medicine, I bought like the most expensive textbooks I could get on the subject, and I just watched like YouTube videos because I'm like, whoa, I want to learn potentially more and see what's been discovered. But what I just kept running into is like, this is not what I've observed. This is not what I've seen. So I just want to point that out. There's a really big difference. And I think it's important because if what I'm saying is actually the truth, then we need to go deeper into that in order to truly end cancer and resolve things. And you can be coaching someone with lung cancer and trying to get them more comfortable with facing death and changing their belief systems about death and stuff. But it'll just be hit and miss. You'll be kind of guessing because that's not the issue that's actually caused their cancer. What's happened in the world today is that, first of all, half of humanity, roughly, statistically, is developing cancer. So 1 in 2 people. Now, the other half is not healthy necessarily, right? So the other half is experiencing all the symptoms associated with varying types of inflammatory processes, like a migraine. It's related to inflammation. Low back pain related to inflammation, and aches and pains and skin breakouts and everything else that you can imagine is it's all related to inflammation. The difference with cancer is that the inflammatory process is trying to surround the tumor, but it can't actually resolve the problem. And just like with the other inflammatory, and the tumor's there because of a suppression, whereas the other 1 in 2 people that are experiencing symptoms in their body, that's occurring because of exposure to toxins, because of malnutrition, because of not sleeping for weeks on end, because of a parasite infection, which wakes you up at night, and all these other things. So there's all kinds of reasons why inflammation can occur in the body. But generally, if we address that lifestyle factor, then the inflammation will cease because it will be able to complete its healing process because the insult has been resolved. But so most of the other types of symptoms are occurring from a variety of factors, which are physical, like toxins, but also psycho-emotional. So this still affects our physical body. Psycho-emotional things, stresses still cause all kinds of other symptoms of the body too. But with cancer, it's a suppression of the stress. So that is the cause of cancer. So now what happens is, because humanity is in such dire straits, really, to be honest. I mean, if 1 in 2 people are developing cancer, it means humanity has a pretty significant problem, right? And what's happening is we have learned as a species how to cope with challenges in our life. So the human race has a ton of coping strategies, and one of the primary ones, psycho-emotionally, is to suppress, not talk about it, not feel it anymore, disconnect from it. This is an instinctual almost way of surviving. But then there's other things. If we're not happy, which is a form of stress, psycho-emotionally, then we can drink alcohol. If we're tired, we feel tired, then we can drink like a big huge coffee. If we're depressed, we could go get drugs from the pharmaceutical companies to suppress our depression, right? To disconnect us from our feelings. Now, with grief, what I ended up discovering is that if we have unresolved grief, we can smoke a cigarette because nicotine helps soothe the lungs, helps open them up a little more, helps relax things and reduce the constriction we have in the lungs related to this suppressed emotion of grief. But so we can, and even overeating can be an emotionally driven thing, a psycho-emotionally driven thing, because because we've become so damaged emotionally. So what's actually happening in humanity is we're receiving more, and with generations, we're receiving an accumulation of psycho-emotional stress and damage. And this is increasing the occurrence of cancer across the human race. And unless the human race actually understands the real cause, it's just not really going to be taken seriously and changed. And to address this stuff is not easy. It is not easy. Like if you have cancer, it's kind of easy to just start juicing, or it's easy to eat like apricot kernels or something. And I wouldn't say it's easy to take chemotherapy, because it can be one hell of a painful, like even tragic experience. Like chemotherapy has definitely caused deaths. But I would say that doing chemotherapy is actually even easier than getting into the root cause work, as I call it, and getting down into our psycho-emotional reality and into our belief systems and into our fears and into our emotional pains and stuff, and actually resolving it. That's actually really difficult to do. But when it's resolved, what I realized in those years living with people with cancer, and now since I've gone online, I have some testimonials accumulating as well. Cancer just goes away. It actually just completely goes away, because
So now you're
when the
getting into my
suppression is removed. Yep.
yeah, now you're getting into my areas of expertise. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I think one of the best ways to describe the expertise of a clinical psychologist is we are experts in coping. And there are three primary forms of coping: approach versus avoidant coping, and there's another form of coping called interpunitive avoidance. But the approach concept of coping is, when people who face their problems head on, they're really good problem solvers. They make room for their emotional experience. If a loved one did pass away, they would grieve that loss fully, and experience all the emotions that are normal and expected to go in response to such an event. And that is the moving of energy. Like if we look at emotions as energy in motion, that is the moving of energy, and we're quite resilient as people. We've just to be able to evolve to this point in humanity, we've had to go through tragic losses, loss of children, high infant mortality rates, trauma, and so forth. So really, we do have this built-in mechanism to emotionally heal from such events. The avoidant coper, on the other hand, is one who does emotionally suppress or repress emotions. It could be through many different means that you've spoken about already, from alcohol use to gambling to getting busy all the time, to use the internet, to not thinking about something that is emotionally distressing, to sleeping too much, to not sleeping not enough, working too much. Anything to avoid the emotional experience is called experiential avoidance, and it's associated with a lot of negative health outcomes. Obviously, if you're going to avoid emotional experiences and maybe turn into unhealthy food or alcohol or smoking, that's correlated with negative health outcomes. And so we tend to look at that behavior as correlated with the negative health outcomes. But what you're saying is also it is not being able to process emotions in a healthy way, not being able to cope effectively, is also influencing our body in negative ways and has a direct influence on the development of cancer. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yep. That's
Okay.
exactly right. Yeah.
So then I want to